Before the Town, Woke, October, December 1880. Come sit with me a while. I've got a story about a rusted bucket, a leather cord, and a man who said more with a bundle of prairie flowers than most people say in a lifetime. He had learned, by his 38th year, that a man could carry a thing so long it stopped feeling like weight. It just became part of how he stood. The morning he first saw her, it was the 7th of October. He was coming out of Haverstock's Hardware when the eastbound stage stopped across the road. A woman stepped down carrying a plain wooden box, not a trunk. Just a box. Both arms wrapped under it. She wore black. Her back was straight in the way of someone working very hard, not to show how much the straightness cost her. She didn't look around the way newcomers always did, searching for something familiar in a strange town. She stood in the road with her box until a small boy came down the stage steps after her, and then a girl, and then she simply turned and walked toward the empty house at the end of Birch Street without asking a single person for directions. He didn't speak to her. He went home and started supper. That night, he walked back past Haverstock's on his way to the feed mill. There was a bin outside the door, end-of-season things the storekeeper put out when summer goods wouldn't sell. Dried prairie wildflowers, tied in rough bunches, 2 cents apiece. He'd passed that bin a dozen times through October without stopping. That night, he stopped. He bought one bundle. He did not entirely know why. He set it on her step before sunup, before his 4 children stirred, before the town cracked an eye open. Then he went home, started the fire, and told himself he would not do it again. By the middle of December, he'd done it 43 times. He kept a piece of leather cord cut from an old bridle. Nothing else held the bundles right. When the hardware bin ran dry in November, he foraged dried goldenrod from the creek bed, seed heads from the tall grass on the road south, sprigs of cedar when nothing else offered itself, 2 cents worth of whatever winter allowed, tied with the cord, left before first light. He never once waited to see if she found them. His eldest, Willa 13, with the particular gift of reading a room without being told what was in it, found him at the door one morning in his coat, with the bundle already in his hand. 4:30. The house still dark. She looked at him. He looked at her. She turned and went back to bed without a word. He appreciated that about Willa more than he could say. His youngest, May 5, round-cheeked and stubborn, had caught him once and asked what kind of errand was done before sunup. The kind that won't keep, he told her. She accepted this the way May accepted most things, with a long, considering look, and then sleep. On his way home each morning, he passed the rusted bucket sitting on the widow's porch beside the door, dented at the lip, going orange with the frost. It had been there since the day she arrived, set down once and never picked back up. He never touched it, never asked what it had held, but he noticed it every time, the way you noticed a thing when something about it wouldn't quite let you go. He told himself he wasn't waiting for anything. You'd understand, if you'd ever carried something long enough, why a man might genuinely believe that. What October brought her. November 1880. He didn't ask questions about her. He didn't need to. Holt's Crossing in November was a town where information moved faster than weather. Her name was Vera Hale. She'd come from somewhere in Missouri, a town nobody could pin down exactly. Her husband had died in the spring from what no one agreed upon. Though Mrs. Eunice Aldrich at the post office had a theory for every occasion and shared all of them freely. Vera had 2 children, a girl named Pearl, who was 10, and a boy named Gus, who was 5 and small for it. She'd arrived with 1 trunk, the wooden box, and approximately nothing else. Her 3rd day in Holt's Crossing, she walked into Pearson's general store and asked for work. Pearson told her there wasn't any. She thanked him by name, she'd learned it somehow, all ready, and walked out without complaint. He heard this from the feed mill operator, who'd heard it from Pearson himself, who told it with a tone partway between guilt and bewilderment. "Thanked me by name," Pearson said. "Never met the woman before in my life." He thought about that on the walk home. A woman who learned the names of people who turned her away. His second daughter, Nell 10, and prone to close observation, asked about Vera over supper one evening. "Who's the widow on Birch Street?" "Name's Mrs. Hale," he said. Nell stirred her beans. "She got children. 2. They in school yet?" He didn't know. He looked at his plate. 3 days later, Pearl Hale sat 2 rows behind Nell at the schoolhouse and didn't speak to anyone all morning. Willa told him this at supper, not pressing anything by it, just telling. He said nothing. Mrs. Aldrich had begun talking in the feed store, at the church door, in the gap between 2 men at the hardware counter. "Not proper," she said, "for a widow to receive flowers from a man she'd never spoken to. Encouraging something unseemly. A man in his position ought to know better." He wasn't sure what position she meant. He let it alone. One morning in late November, coming back from Birch Street before first light, he had the particular sensation of being watched. He didn't turn around. It could have been anything, a neighbor's dog, the cold. But when he reached the bend in the road and glanced back, there was a faint shape in the window of the Hale house. A lamp, barely lit. Something in the frame of it. He walked on. That evening he noticed the rusted bucket had been turned slightly, not moved from its spot, just turned the way something gets turned when a person reaches down to test whether it's solid, then thinks better of picking it up. He told himself it was the wind. He noticed it all the same. The debt he couldn't name. December 1880. His wife's name had been Grace. She had died 2 years ago, on a Tuesday, in November. He'd known for months before the doctor confirmed it. The way she tired in the afternoons. The way she moved through the kitchen, slower and slower, like a woman wading through something thicker than air. He knew. And the knowing frightened him more than he'd ever been frightened by anything. So he worked. Not from indifference, God. Not from that. From the particular paralysis of a man who does not know how to hold still against something that cannot be fixed. He repaired other men's fences. He re-roofed other men's barns. He was useful everywhere except the one place it mattered. Because being useful was the only thing he knew how to offer. 2 days before she died, Grace had said to him, "Clem, stay closer." Not a plea, just a fact, stated plainly, the way she stated everything. "I will," he said. He didn't. The night she died, he was on the Haggerty barn roof by lamplight, Fixing a leak nobody asked him to fix that particular Tuesday. He just went and vented the reason as he was already leaving. Grace died with Willa beside her and nobody else in the house. And by the time he got home, the lamp in the bedroom window had gone out. He had not forgiven himself. He had not tried very hard to. Here's what nobody in town understood about those flowers, not even her. They weren't a gift. They were a debt. And the man leaving them wasn't sure it could ever be paid. Vera Hale had arrived in this town carrying a box and 2 children, and a back held straight at considerable cost. And she had not smiled once since October. And he knew, not assumed, not imagined, but knew exactly what holding yourself like that required. He'd done it himself for 2 years. Someone should have stayed once, and he hadn't been that person. He could at least be the person who showed up, even if he never knocked, even if she never knew why. One winter evening, children asleep, he sat at the table and wrote it all down. The barn roof, the Tuesday, what Grace had asked him, what he'd said, what he hadn't done. He wrote until his hand ached. Then he folded the paper, held it in both hands for a long moment, and pressed it under the floorboard beside the stove. He blew out the lamp, sat in the dark a while, didn't move until the cold made him. His son, Lev 7, and inclined toward gestures, had put a tin of dried grass on the work table the week before, stood there looking proud about it. Like the ones you leave, Papa, he'd said. Clem Walsh had not corrected him. Willow bark and lamplight, January 1881. Gus Hale got sick on a Wednesday. Willa heard it from Pearl at school. The boy had been feverish since Monday and was getting worse. The doctor was expected Thursday from Belen. That was a day and a half away. Clem had seen Vera that same morning at Haverstock's, 2 aisles down, reading labels on tins with the focused expression of a woman trying to stretch knowledge she only half had. He recognized the trouble before she found the right shelf. Willow bark for fever, she was standing in front of the wrong row entirely. He reached past her without a word and handed her the correct tin. She looked at him. Her eyes were gray and steady, and she did not startle easily. He could see that. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, paid for his nails, left. By evening, Willa said the boy's fever had climbed to 104. He stood in his kitchen a long moment. He looked at the shelf below the window where he kept the kit he'd put together when Grace was sick: camphor, clean cloth, dried feverfew, a bar of pine soap. He hadn't opened it in 2 years. He put on his coat. He knocked on her door for the first time at 8:30. She opened it, lamp in hand, Pearl standing just behind her shoulder, and he held up the kit without speaking, just held it out so she could see what it was. She looked at him for what felt like a considerable while. Then she stepped aside. Gus was in the back room, burning up and small against the quilts. Clem wrung cloths in cold water and laid them across the boy's forehead and didn't talk, because there was nothing to say that a cool cloth didn't say better. Vera sat on the other side of the bed, Pearl curled at the foot, watching her brother breathe. Around midnight, Vera sent Pearl to the well. Pearl came back carrying the rusted bucket from the porch, full to the brim with cold water. It was the first time it had held anything since October. Clem dipped a cloth, wrung it, pressed it gently to Gus's thin wrist. "He'll do," Clem said around 2 in the morning, when the fever had begun its slow retreat. "Feverfew, in warm water twice come mornin'. Keep him still." Vera had her hands folded in her lap. She was watching her son's chest rise and fall with the careful attention of a woman who had already lost enough. "You've done this before," she said. "Some," he said, which was the truth. By 4 in the morning, the boy was sleeping easy. Clem stood to go. Vera was at the stove with her back to him. She didn't turn around. "He'll want to know your name," she said. "When he's better." He stopped at the door. "Clem," he said. "Clem Walsh." She nodded once, still facing the stove. He went out into the dark and walked home, and the rusted bucket empty again. Set back on the porch step was the last thing he saw before the bend in the road took him out of sight. What the children learned first. Late January, February 1881. Gus recovered over 3 days. His color came back on Friday, and he ate half a bowl of porridge Saturday, and by Sunday was sitting up in bed, asking Willa, who came to the door with a small carved figure Lev had made, a man with a hat and both arms out, whether the thing was really for him. Willa said it was. Gus held it against his chest like something he'd been waiting for. Clem visited twice more that week. He didn't knock the second time she left the door unlatched, and he came in, checked the boy's breathing, left a measure of feverfew on the kitchen table without being asked. The third time he came. Gus was sitting up and regarded him with the gravity of a 5-year-old who had decided to take something seriously. "You're Clem," Gus said. "I am." Mama said. Clem looked at him. She did. Gus considered this satisfactorily settled and returned to the carved figure. By the end of January, Pearl and Willa were walking home from school on the same road, not exactly together, but close enough to talk. Nell had taken it upon herself to show Pearl where the good climbing tree was behind the schoolyard. Lev and Gus had arrived at the wordless understanding that boys of proximate age and height were obliged to become either allies or enemies, and had chosen allies without much deliberation. He watched all of this from a careful distance and said nothing. Think about a man who gives without believing he deserves to receive. You know someone like that. The first day of February, he came around the bend before 5 in the morning and found a folded cloth on the step where the flowers always went. He stopped. He picked it up, unfolded it. 2 biscuits, still warm. He stood there a full minute in the cold dark with the cloth in his hands. He did not move. Then he put 1 biscuit in his coat pocket for Lev and ate the other on the walk home, slowly, in the dark, and did not speak to anyone about what he was feeling because he did not have a word for it yet. That evening, after supper, after the children were down, he sat at the table again. He took out a fresh sheet of paper. He didn't write the long letter, nothing like it, just 1 short page. "I know you didn't ask for any of this. I'll stop if you want me to. You only have to say so." He folded it, held it in both hands for a long time. Then he pressed it under the floorboard beside the stove, on top of the other letter, and went to bed. In the morning, the bucket was different. She'd washed it, the rust scrubbed down to bare metal, the dented lips straightened as far as a dent would go. It sat on the porch in the early dark, clean and upright, in the same spot as always. He looked at it for a moment, set the flowers beside it, walked home. He thought about that bucket for the rest of the day and couldn't have explained why it sat behind his sternum like a coal that wouldn't go cold. What the town decided. Late February 1881. The last Sunday of February. The church women held their winter social in the fellowship hall. Vera Hale came because Pearl had been invited by Nell, and she would not let Pearl go anywhere she hadn't gone first. She sat near the window with a cup of coffee and did not impose herself on anyone. Mrs. Eunice Aldrich imposed herself on her. Mrs. Aldrich was a woman who believed that silence implied permission and that her own comfort constituted a community principle. She came to stand beside Vera's chair with the deliberateness of someone who'd been working herself toward it since October. "I hope you won't take this unkindly," she said, which meant she didn't particularly care whether Vera took it kindly or not. "But folks are talking about the flowers and the attention." Vera looked up at her. "Are they? It ain't proper for a widow to be seen encouraging a man's attentions before a decent period's passed." "I see." Vera's voice was even. "And what period would be decent? At least a year, out of respect." "He hasn't spoken to me of attentions," Vera said, each word measured and set in place. "He has only ever been kind." She lifted her coffee cup. "If that troubles people, I can't help it." The room went the particular kind of quiet that comes when everyone is pretending to look elsewhere. Mrs. Aldrich withdrew. Vera finished her coffee. Willa told Clem about it that evening. He listened without moving. Then he sat for a long time in the chair by the fire. He would stop. It was the right thing. She had her own difficulties without him adding the town's opinion to them. 3 mornings in a row, he woke before 4, dressed, and sat back down at the kitchen table. The flowers lay on the counter. He left them there. He started the fire and went about his morning. On the 4th morning, he came downstairs to find Lev already up, coat buttoned crooked, holding a bundle of dried grass tied with a bit of twine. His face was set and serious. "I'll go," Lev said. "She likes 'em." Clem stood in the kitchen doorway looking at his 7-year-old in his crooked coat. "How do you know she likes them?" "'Cause she don't take 'em inside right away," Lev said, with the plain certainty of someone stating an observed fact. "She leaves 'em there a while, like she's looking at 'em first." Clem was quiet a moment. "Give me those," he said. He took the dried grass from Lev's hands and set it on the counter. He reached past it for the real bundle cedar and seed heads. Tied with the leather cord, he put on his coat. "Go back to sleep," he told Lev. Lev went, wearing the expression of a boy whose plan had worked exactly as intended. Clem went out into the dark. The cold was sharp and clean. He walked the road to Birch Street the way he'd walked it every morning for 4 months. He set the flowers beside the clean bucket. He walked home. The bucket had been out there through the 3 days he hadn't come. She hadn't moved it inside. He thought about that for a long while. The letter. She wasn't meant to read. March 1881. First thaw. The thaw came in the first week of March. sudden and muddy, the way Colorado Springs always announce themselves. Ice ran off the roof in long drips, and the road to Birch Street went soft underfoot. And there were mornings Clem could smell the earth coming back to itself under all that cold. It was on one of those mornings that he made the mistake. He'd had the small note since February. I know you didn't ask for any of this folded and tucked in his coat pocket each morning when he set out, telling himself he'd bring it back home. Each morning, he forgot. This particular morning, it slipped out from his coat and came to rest flat against the bundle when he set the flowers down. He didn't notice until the bend in the road. He turned back, walked quickly through the mud, rounded the corner of Birch Street. The flowers were still there. The note was gone. He stood looking at the empty step for a long moment. Then he walked home. She knew then, not everything. She didn't have his whole story yet, but she knew enough. And here's what I'll tell you, knowing enough is its own kind of courage. 3 days passed in a kind of suspension. He still left the flowers. She left no cloth, no sign. Pearl was quieter with Willa at school, not unfriendly, just careful, like someone waiting to see something decided. He couldn't sleep past 3 in the morning and stop trying. He could imagine her reading it. I know you didn't ask for any of this. I'll stop if you want me to. He tried to imagine her face and found he couldn't get past the first sentence without something tightening in his chest. On the 3rd night, Willa came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table at midnight. She didn't say anything about it. She heated the coffee pot and poured 2 cups and sat across from him. And they drank in silence until the tightness eased enough to breathe through. She's not unkind, Willa said, finally. I know that. She's just been alone a long time. He looked at his daughter across the table, 13 years old, reading everything right. So have I, he said. Willa didn't answer, but she refilled his cup. On the 4th morning, he came around the bend before first light and stopped. The bucket was gone, not moved aside, not turned, gone. The step was empty. His chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Then the door opened. Vera was standing in her coat, the bucket in both hands. She held it out to him. He took it without thinking. Inside 3 dried wildflowers. His first bundle, from October, still tied with the original leather cord. She had kept them through 4 months of winter. He could not look at her and look at the flowers at the same time. He looked at the flowers. I didn't ask you to stop, she said. Her voice was even, not warm, not yet, but something in it that was the opposite of closed. He still could not find a single word. She went back inside. The door clicked softly behind her. He stood on that step until the cold forced him to move. Then he walked home in the first pale light with the bucket under his arm, the 3 October flowers inside it, and the smell of the earth coming back to itself all around him. What he should have said 3 years ago, late March 1881. It was Willa who told her. He didn't know this until later. What he knew was that one Wednesday after school, Pearl came by the house to walk home with Willa, and that Vera had been waiting at the corner of the lane, and that the 2 of them had spoken briefly. When Willa described it at supper, she said only, "She asked if you were all right, Pa." He was quiet a moment. "What did you tell her? The truth?" Willa said. She looked at her plate. "That you don't sleep much, that you talk to Mama's grave sometimes, that you never say what for." He finished his supper. He didn't answer. On Sunday morning she came to his door. All four of his children were home. Lev and Gus were in the yard. Pearl sat with Nell on the porch step, both of them intently occupied with something that required no looking up. Vera knocked twice, and he opened the door. "I'd like to speak with you," she said. They walked to the fence at the edge of his property, far enough that the children's voices went soft behind them. She stopped at the post, hands folded, looking at the middle distance. "Why do you leave them?" she asked. He had imagined this conversation 100 times over 4 months. He had never imagined being able to answer. But standing at the fence, with the ground soft under his boots and the first green pressing up through the dead grass, he heard himself speak, quietly, in order, grace, the months of knowing and being too frightened to hold still against something that couldn't be fixed, the fences he repaired and the barns he re-roofed, the 100 reasons invented to be somewhere useful instead of home. The night she died, the 2 hours Willa sat with her alone, what Grace had asked him 2 days before, stay closer, and what he had promised and not done. This is the part I've thought about the longest. Not what she said next, how she said it. Like she'd been carrying it ready for weeks and was finally setting it down. He was looking at the fence post when he finished. He waited for her to say something polite and leave. She didn't. "My husband stopped seeing me 2 years before he died," she said. "Not leave, just stopped. Every morning I set coffee by his elbow. He never looked up. He wasn't a bad man." A pause. He was just somewhere else entirely. She turned to look at him. He made himself meet her eyes. "You have been leaving flowers for a woman you don't know for 4 months in the cold." Her voice was steady. "Do you understand what that is?" He shook his head. "It is the opposite," she said, "of not looking up." He held her gaze. She didn't look away. "I see you too," she said. Plain, quiet. The way she said everything that mattered. The tightness he'd carried so long, it had become part of how he stood. Let go. All at once, like a door opened from the inside. They walked back to the house without speaking. The children pretended very hard not to watch. That night, he took the long letter from under the floorboard and read it through once. He fed it to the fire and watched until the last edge went dark. Then he went to bed and slept through until morning for the first time in 2 years. Every porch, every morning. April-May 1881. April came in warm and in a hurry, the way it did after a hard winter, as if the land itself had grown impatient. The creek ran high and the willows along the south road leafed out almost overnight, and the prairie east of town went from brown to green to gold in the span of 3 weeks. He still left flowers in the morning, but now, sometimes. She opened the door. Not always. Not on any schedule he could have predicted. Some mornings he set the bundle down, and heard the latch, and she'd be there in her coat, hair still loose, holding 2 cups of coffee, both of them watching the light come up over the flat land without needing to fill it with words. Some mornings she wasn't there. Those mornings he left the flowers and walked home, and that was enough too. By the time the church announced the spring planting feast, the children had stopped behaving like 2 separate families. They were simply together. Lev and Gus had developed an entire private language of looks and nudges. Pearl had taken to sitting close enough to Clem at supper that their arms sometimes touched, and she never pulled away. Nell and Willa had taken Vera under their quiet, joint protection in a way that was both obvious and carefully unspoken. The feast was held the last Friday of April, in the big hall behind the church, with tables borrowed from 3 households and fiddle music that started before the food was even set out. The whole town came. Vera arrived with Pearl and Gus. Clem arrived with his 4. Somewhere between the door and the long center table, they ended up side by side, and that was where they stayed. He said something small, not even particularly clever, about Lev's crooked hat, and Vera laughed. Not the careful social sound she'd been producing since October. A real laugh. Surprise straight out of her, her hand coming up a half-second too late to catch it. Her whole face changed when she laughed. He hadn't known that until this moment. Mrs. Aldrich saw it from across the room. So did everyone else. And something settled. In the hall, and in the town, and in the long, cold winter that had been more than just cold, that had needed settling for a long time. After dark, they walked home through the warm night, all 6 children moving ahead in a loose, noisy cluster, Vera and Clem a few steps behind. Lev ran back without being asked to drape Vera's shawl over her shoulders. Solemn as a deacon, Gus held Willa's hand on the uneven ground. Pearl walked close enough to Clem that their shoulders touched the whole way home. They were the last 2 in the hall, stacking borrowed chairs. He picked up the final 2, and she held the door. He paused in the doorway. She didn't step back. "You can knock next time," she said. "In the morning." He looked at her in the lamplight spilling out from behind her, the warm hall, the spring night, the sound of his children's voices carrying back through the dark from somewhere up the road. "Yes'm," he said, and went out smiling. The next morning, before sunup, he came around the bend on Birch Street and stopped. On his porch step at home, she must have gone before dawn. Before even he was awake, there was a bucket, full to the brim with late April wildflowers, tied with a piece of leather cord. He stood there 3 full minutes before he went inside. On her step, his bundle, same as always, 2 porches, 2 buckets, both full, and between the 2 houses in the early morning light. Lev and Gus were already sitting on the step they'd claimed as their own, sharing a biscuit without speaking, watching the sun come up over the Colorado plain like it was the most natural thing in the world, which, by then, it was. I'll be honest, this one stayed with me longer than most. There's something about a man who shows up before sunrise for 4 months without asking for a single thing back, and a woman who keeps 3 dried flowers through an entire winter without saying a word about it. 2 people who'd both forgotten. somewhere along the way, what it felt like to be truly seen and found out, one quiet morning at a time, that they still could be. This is a fiction story we created for entertainment, but we hope it adds a little something to your life tonight. Thanks for hearing us out till the very end.